If you think explaining your boundaries makes them clearer, it doesn't. It makes them negotiable. Because every explanation is an opening for questions, an opening for pushback, an opening for someone to tell you why your boundary doesn't make sense. Boundaries aren't proposals. They're not up for discussion. They're not subject to approval. They're not requests waiting for permission. Boundaries are authority statements, and authority doesn't explain itself. So if you've been over-explaining your boundaries, justifying why you need them, defending why they're reasonable, you've been teaching people that your boundaries are optional. And once you see that, you can stop negotiating. Boundary explaining isn't a habit. It's a response. Notice this. You don't feel the urge to justify yourself when the outcome isn't up for debate. You don't over-explain when your decision is already final, when your position is secure, when your authority isn't being tested. The explanation only shows up when something feels conditional, specifically in dynamics where your limits have been challenged before, your needs were treated as negotiable, your authority wasn't assumed. It had to be earned. That's when the language changes. You soften, you add context, you offer reasons in advance, not to be clear, but to reduce resistance. And here's the part most people miss. The moment a boundary needs justification, it's no longer being received as a boundary. It's being evaluated. And whoever gets to evaluate it is holding leverage over whether it stands. Explaining your boundaries isn't communication. It's asking for permission. Every time you justify why you need a boundary, you're not making it clearer, you're making it conditional. You're saying this boundary exists if you agree with my reasoning. And the moment reasoning is required, authority is already being questioned. Think of it like this. Policies don't require buy-in, they're announced. Proposals require approval, they're negotiated. When you explain a boundary, you're treating it like a proposal, something that needs to be reviewed, assessed, and approved by the other person. But boundaries aren't proposals, they're policies. And policies don't ask permission. You've lived this before. You set up a boundary, could be at work, with family, or in a relationship, and before you even finish stating it, you hear yourself adding, I just think it's important because I hope you understand why I need this. It's not that I don't want to, it's just that wasn't clarity. That was you preemptively defending against an objection that hadn't even been raised yet. You weren't explaining the boundary. You were negotiating with yourself about whether you had the right to set it. When you understand this, you stop treating boundary setting as a debate. And you start asking, why am I seeking approval for something that's mine to decide? You didn't start explaining your boundaries because you're unclear. You started explaining them because unexplained boundaries weren't accepted. When leverage is uneven, stating a boundary creates tension. And tension feels dangerous. So you learn to manage it. Not by enforcing the boundary, but by softening it with explanation. Think of a boundary like a contract. When you sign a contract, you don't explain why each clause is there. The contract simply states the terms, and both parties either agree or they don't sign. But imagine if every time you presented a contract, someone said, why is this clause here? This seems unreasonable. Can we negotiate this part? And instead of holding firm, you started explaining. Well, the reason this clause exists is because I think it's fair because I hope you can see why this matters. What happens, the contract stops being a contract. It becomes a negotiation. And in a negotiation, Whoever holds more leverage gets to revise the terms. That's what happens when you explain boundaries. You convert an authority statement into a negotiation. And negotiations always favor whoever has less to lose. Ask yourself this: who benefits when you explain your boundaries? Because it's rarely you. It benefits the boss who wants you available after hours, because now they can debate whether your boundary is really necessary. The family member who wants access to your choices because your explanation gives them leverage to question your judgment. The partner who resists accountability because they can pick apart your reasoning instead of respecting your limit. The friend who takes more than they give because your justification signals the boundary is negotiable. Every time you explain, you hand someone a tool to debate your reasoning, question your motives, suggest alternatives, convince you the boundary is unreasonable. And here's what makes this so effective. Once you've explained that they don't have to respect the boundary, they just have to find a flaw in your explanation. But that doesn't make sense because I don't think that's fair because you didn't mention this before. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about your boundary. It's about whether your reasoning holds up under scrutiny. And that's how leverage shifts. Not through rejecting your boundary outright, but through making you defend it until you withdraw it yourself. Here's what most women don't realize. You've been the one keeping your boundaries negotiable. Not because you're weak, but because you keep treating them like proposals instead of policies. Every time you explain why you need a boundary, justify why it's reasonable, soften the language so it doesn't offend, preemptively address objections, you're signaling that your boundary is up for discussion. You thought you were being considerate. What you were actually doing was inviting input on something that was never theirs to approve. Here's what most people misunderstand. They think the resistance they feel is proof their boundary is unreasonable. But the resistance isn't about the boundary. It's about the loss of access. And the moment you stop explaining, you stop giving people leverage to negotiate your limits. Because your justification was their opening. Your explanation was their access point. Your need for approval was their control. That's when authority shifts. Notice this. With whom do you feel the need to justify your boundaries? Not everyone, just specific people and specific dynamics, where your no has never been accepted without negotiation. That's not you being unclear. That's them treating your authority like it's up for debate. And here's what will happen when you set boundaries without explanation. And I'm telling you now so you recognize it when it comes. They'll ask, why? Not once, repeatedly. Why can't you? But why not? I don't understand why. That's not confusion. That's them testing whether your boundary is an authority statement or a negotiation. They'll call you cold. They'll say you're being unfair. They'll suggest you're overreacting. Not because your boundary is unreasonable, but because they're naming their discomfort with the loss of leverage. When you stop explaining, people who benefited from your justifications will try to restore the opening. They'll imply you owe them an explanation. They'll make you feel guilty for not providing one. They'll suggest that boundaries without reasons are hostile. That's not feedback. That's leverage maintenance. And recognizing it is how you keep your boundary intact without falling back into negotiation. Boundaries without explanation doesn't require confidence. They require finality. You state the boundary, then you stop. No cushioning, no justification, no preemptive defense. The shift happens in moments like this. They ask you to do something outside your boundary. You used to say, I can't because I'm really overwhelmed right now and I need to focus on other priorities and I hope you understand. But now just say, I'm not available for that. They push back on your limit. You used to say, I know it seems strict, but the reason I need this is because. Now just say, this is my boundary. They might ask why. You used to respond by providing detailed explanations of your reasoning. But now I need you to just say, I don't need to explain that. Or simply silence. You stop performing justification. You stop defending your right to have limits. You stop treating your boundaries like proposals that are awaiting approval. Because authority doesn't negotiate. It states. And statements don't require buy-in. Now, most people miss this. Boundaries aren't requests. They're not invitations to discuss. They're not proposals awaiting approval. Boundaries are authority statements. And authority statements don't require explanation. You've been treating your boundaries like they need to pass a review. But the only person who needs to approve your boundary is you. The moment you stop explaining, you stop converting authority into negotiation. And the moment negotiation ends, power recalibrates. Not because you became harsh, but because you became final. And finality is authority. Now you have a choice. You can keep explaining your boundaries and treat them as negotiations, or you can state them without justification and treat them as authority. One keeps your limits up for debate, the other makes them final. This channel isn't about being louder, it's about being final. If you're done negotiating your boundaries with people who benefit from your explanations, subscribe. This is where authority stops explaining itself.